Welcome to Bespoken Bones with your host, Pavini Moray, connecting ancestors, sex, magic and science. Pavini explores transpersonal tools for erotic wellness every new and full moon, engaging educators, healers, spiritual leaders and scientists in revolutionary dialogue. Get ready to feel good and go deep. This is Bespoken Bones.
Hi, and welcome to Bespoken Bones, ancestors at the crossroads of sex, magic, and science. We're in the business of healing trauma, connecting with our roots, and developing radiant, erotic wellness in past, present, and future generations. I am your host, Pavini Moray, and I am delighted to introduce you today to Taya Shere. Taya plays passionately in the realms of transformative ritual and embodied vocalization. She is the co-founder and co-director of the Kohenet Institute, and her chant albums, Wild Earth Chibru, Hallelujah All Night, Torah Tantrika, and This Bliss, have been heralded as cutting-edge mystic medicine music. She is the co-author of The Hebrew Priestess, Ancient and New Visions of Jewish Women's Spiritual Leadership, and Sidur HaKohenet, a Hebrew priestess prayer book. She is a practitioner of somatic experiencing and ancestral lineage healing. In addition to tending the Kohenet community, Taya co-leads Makam Shakina, a multi-religious Jewish Sufi spiritual community. She teaches at the Star King School for the Ministry and mentors emergent spiritual leaders in person and virtually in embodied presence and counter-oppressive devotion. She makes home, music, and other magic in the California East Bay. And you can check out her website, www.holytaya.com. That's HOLYTAYA.com. Taya, hi, welcome.
Thank you, Pavini. Such a pleasure to be with you.
I am curious if you would talk a little bit about your work with Kohenet. Like, what is it? What are your missions? What are you doing?
I'm delighted to. Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute is a community, a training program, and a movement changing the face of Judaism. We founded Kohenet 12 years ago, particularly to focus on reclaiming and innovating embodied, earth-based models of Jewish spiritual leadership in celebration of the goddess. And it's been absolutely amazing to feel the reality of this vision and this work manifesting. We're a community that's worldwide, and we run clergy training programs on each coast of the US. And the magic is palpable in this work. It's really a remembering of ancient ways and a discovering of new ways and a listening deep to wisdom that has been lost and is ripe to be renewed, and also an evolution of new possibilities in the realm of transformative ritual and embodied earth-loving spiritual practice.
I know that this is pretty radical work that you have been doing for the last dozen years. Would you talk a little bit about the role of ancestors in this tradition?
I'd love to. Ancestors are at the root of our work in Kohenet. In so many ways, I came to this work out of a deep desire to heal at the roots of my own ancestral lineage, and both in blood lineage and spiritual lineage, feeling a strong call to remember the ancient ways and honor what had been passed down in my lines. And in Kohenet, we work deeply with the four mamas and the four papas in this Jewish tradition that we've been handed, drawing deeply also on many strands of spiritual practice in the ancient Near East. And we work particularly with 13 priestess paths, 13 ways of knowing and leading, including paths like the midwife, the mourning woman, the shamaness, the lover, the weaver. And in these archetypes that we work with, it's really a tending of lineage strands, working with the ones who hold these particular ways of knowing ancestrally from ancient times until now. And we work with them by studying ancient texts, by looking at ways that their qualities and gifts have been put into practice, and looking at how we can embody these paths of leadership and wisdom now. And there's this strand of tending the ancestors by remembering these gifts and ways of the ancients, and also by looking at the ways more widely that our ancestors, both in Jewish spiritual lineage and our ancestors, those of us in the community of blood lineage of various kinds, looking at how our people were praying in embodied ways, in ways that include offering practice, perhaps, looking at ways that the ancestors are and want to be a source of great blessing in our lives, and also want to be tended to. The magic that I have experienced in really activating practices in my spiritual life of remembering the ways that my ancestors prayed, and rooting in those well, renewing them in ways that feel most resonant and relevant for me. Those practices are so impactful. I feel in the prayers that we pray the pulsing of eons of blessing that have been poured in to these words. And yet, in some places, the words of our ancestors are not always the specific words that are most resonant for us. I'm thinking, for example, when I first returned to Judaism as a spiritual practice as an adult, it was simultaneously so home for me to recite the Shema, which is the core prayer in Jewish tradition. It was so important in my cells and my bones to recite this prayer that has been recited again and again and again by my ancestors. And yet, the words of this prayer, traditionally, as first said in Torah, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. These words, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one." Those words, or at least that translation of those words, are not the most resonant for me. And so I was at this crossroads, this tension of how do I pray this prayer that is so alive in my bones, and yet how do I pray it in a way that well meets me and is an accurate expression of my experience of divinity. And I listened, and in a lens that is one we apply in Kohenet and that is applied in Jewish spiritual contexts by many who are renewing ways of devotion, I chose and choose to pray in language that is more resonant for me. I pray, Shema Yisrael, Shekhinah Eloteinu, Shekhinah Achat. Hear, O Yisrael, Shekhinah, she who dwells within, the presence of divinity that is right here in our bodies, in this earth. She is here, one with us. And for me, kind of the meeting of praying the core prayers and praying them in a way that is alive for me is this dance of being in connection with the ancestors and conversation with them in a way that's not a leaving of what was given, but being deeply informed by tradition and bringing a vitality to it that allows it to still pulse with relevance and resonance in my practice each day.
I love that, the discernment muscle that you're exercising, right, as you're listening in an embodied way to both the call of your ancestors, the call of the tradition, as well as what's alive for you in the present. Yeah,
definitely. And I feel like something that's so exciting for me is that I feel like the ancestors love it too. Not perhaps all of them always, but there's a desire from a place of deep for these ancient wisdom ways to remain alive. And there's a knowing that the way they remain alive is not in stagnance. The way that they remain alive is drawing on what's whole and nourishing at the root, and also continually tracking for the places of new life. And so it feels like not only it feels like not an insertion of my own will into what I want to be praying, but more listening deep and honoring what they were up to. I feel quite clear that the ones way before me were both rooting in tradition and also creating new. And this practice of turning to what was and attending particularly also to what is and wants to become, that itself is a way that is deeply rooted in my spiritual lineage.
Taya, I hope it's not a overgeneralization to say that, well, I can say that from my understanding, Jewish folks have a lot of historical trauma as well as transgenerational trauma that's passed down through the lineage. And I'm wondering if how is trauma a call to prayer, in your opinion?
It's a brilliant question. It's so true that we are a people with PTSD, and I feel immensely blessed to be alive at a time where emerging from that narrative of collective trauma is what's wanted. And my sense is there's strong availability for that now in a way that there may have not been in previous generations. There's so many places in the Jewish narrative where what we're doing is telling the story of the trauma and in some ways anchoring it into our cellular memory. There's a joke you may have heard. There's like a Jewish saying of like, they almost killed us, we survived, let's eat. And there's, for me, this excitement about stepping out of that paradigm of needing to survive to being ready to thrive. And my first attending to this was through the body awareness-based trauma healing practice of somatic experiencing, and attending to that work of rooting in positive resource in the body really supported me in shedding my own layers of both inherited and personal experiences of trauma. And what I find is that the way through trauma is in the body, inhabiting the body, being willing to be here. And there are many ways where the Jewish prayer narrative has really been one of serving divinity. That what we look at when we're looking at how to be in relationship with God is how to serve God. And the story that I'm excited about is one of how to embody divinity, how to make space for divinity in our own bodies, how to perceive and receive divinity in the body of each other and in the earth body. And for me, this is the way that trauma is a call to prayer. The way that trauma, the being shaken from our embodied experience, invites us to attend again and again and exquisitely to our embodied experience, to attune to what is well and connected and clear right here and right now, that we may additionally open to the possibility of the presence in us. And I know in my own journey, trauma has been such a key player. Healing from trauma has been such a strand that has led me to greater experiences of presence, and from those experiences of presence, greater experience of God, goddess. And I am one who is not so interested in belief as a thing. I don't so much care what I or you believe, but rather what we experience. And so for me, divinity is about embodied experience. And I feel like the gift in the edge of the Jewish cultural narrative and psycho-spiritual narrative of trauma is the deep ways in which it invites us to attend to embodied practice as sacred.
I feel like yelling hallelujah to hear that. You write about pleasure as prayer and wanting to turn attention right now to somatic experiencing. and that work of healing trauma, because in that methodology, there's also a big focus on exactly what you're saying, of placing attention on pleasure, and on pleasure being the thing that can help us to become free from trauma. And so I'd love to hear you speak about that.
Two core gifts I received and continue to receive in the work of somatic experiencing are attending to positive resource, to experiences of feeling well in our bodies and in ourselves, and also to doing so at right pace, at a pace that allows us to stay in presence and in connection. So not in pleasure overload, but rather in building our muscles for holding and attending to what is good in ourselves and in connection. And those strands, positive resource and right pace, so deeply impact how I understand prayer and connecting to the sacred. As you name, pleasure as prayer and right pace as prayer are two strands that are so central for me in how I embody devotion. And I'm so excited about calling into being how we want to feel in any given experience. And before I sit down to pray or pray while dancing or guide an experience of prayer, a first step for me is always attuning to how I want to feel in the experience and letting that guide and inform the thing, the offering, the song. And I find that prayer wants to be juicy, wants to feel good, and that we want to feel good in prayer, that the feeling good itself is such an affirmation of our aliveness and an offering of aliveness to the ancient ones and to deity. It's in a way for me, like when I am in deep pleasure, I feel in greatest conversation with, greatest pulsing with the universe, with the earth body and the cosmic body and the beyond space and time and the deeply within space and time. And this is something that can be worked with on so many levels. It can be something that is as simple as with each step in perhaps a walking meditation, or simply moving from here to there as part of my day, letting myself feel the contact and the connection of step on earth or even on concrete, and letting the sensory experience and the making space in my awareness for that contact to be one of pleasure. It can be taken in all sorts of directions. It can be erotic pleasure as prayer, offering orgasmic pleasure explicitly toward the healing or transformation of a situation, or as a source of blessing around a person or thing. It can be as simple as savoring the smells when I'm cooking. For me, the practice of prayer and of sensory awareness are not so distinct. So being awake to sensation is being awake to the gift of being alive in this body on this earth, which is such an immense miracle. It's a way of acknowledging and attuning to the millions of things that have gone right already this morning for me to be able to be here well, sitting up, speaking with you. So many miracles continue to unfold, and attuning and attending to pleasure, and also for me to gratitude, being willing to be in unending attention to gratitude. Almost, I tend to think of it as like a gratitude cascade, like how much can I be grateful for? And I feel similarly how many experiences of pleasure can I be tracking and attending to that again and again and anew, and letting myself just deeply enjoy what's possible to enjoy in any given situation. And obviously there are times when pleasure is not the obvious thing. If I'm waiting in line or stuck in traffic, I might not immediately feel the pleasure, but if I remember my pleasure practice and look for how can this too be juicy? How can this too be prayer? It's quite often so available and ready to be embraced.
I really like the phrase pleasure practice. I think it's important to name, as survivors of trauma, that's one of the things that goes, right? It's one of the casualties of trauma is pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it's also the erotic is also the thing that can call us back. That's been my personal experience of like, okay, how I'm a trauma survivor. How do I get out of this limited experience that's defined by trauma into an experience has the capacity to experience pleasure, right? Because that's what I want to choose. And that becomes the medicine, right? So I'm curious if you would speak a little bit to your understanding of the role of the erotic in saving us and in helping us save ourselves.
There are so many ways the erotic brings us home. And a way that I can speak to in myself centers on where I root my voice. When I speak, I understand in my own life experience and from the many wisdom teachings in Judaism and so many other strands, the generative power of vocalization and the impact that we have, the impact that what we put in the world has, and including our sound and our words. And what I know in my own speech is that when I speak from a place of disconnection in my body and my voice, I'm allowing that disconnection a little bit now. You might begin to hear it. There's a shallowness and less depth, and in some ways also less connection to source and center in what I'm saying. And when I feel disconnected from Eros, disconnected from my body, I feel inside of me a little bit lost. And yet, when I let my creation and my offering root in my being, in my body, when I connect my vocal diaphragm to my pelvic diaphragm, when I let my voice be infused with all of me, there's a way in which I come home into my body and into my sound and into the content of what I'm saying. That's a whole nother level. And for me, choosing to inhabit, which is at its core a choice of Eros, a saying yes to body, to earth, to here, to pleasure, to this moment, to sense, that choosing to root in this palpable magic is a choice to make home here in a certain kind of way. And Eros again and again and again guides me home through these simple practices of rooting my movement and my voice in my body. I'm inside of a movement practice these recent years that is a commitment to let my body move me rather than moving my body. And that has entirely changed how I move in the world, how fast I walk, what my dance is like, how I interact with other people. And it's also a choice to stay home, to root in and return to my deep home, which I'm so grateful is here in this body, in this life. And when I choose home, how I move from it or how I move in the world and in relationship necessarily looks different than if I'm engaging from a place of less presence. And what I find also is that there are so many different ways this can look for different people. For some of us, rooting in body as home and rooting in Eros as home is one and the same, and having a certain vibrance and vitality is easeful and comfortable and exciting. And I know that there's some folks that I work with who come to me who are afraid of what it means to be at home in Eros because it might be too much or too edgy, or they might be perceived in a certain way. And I'm excited by a full embrace of Eros and also a deep nuance around it. a non-assumption of what being at home in Eros means for any particular person in any given moment. It's mostly saying yes to attending well to presence and to pleasure, to possibility, to the pulsing and the sensory conversation that is available in every moment if we open to it.
Taya, I'd love to play a little bit of one of your songs. And I just wonder if you would speak a little bit to the intention behind this song that we're going to play here.
Yes, please. We're going to hear Bliss is the Prayer, and the essence of the medicine of this music is clear in its title. And the first lyrics of the song, well before I recorded it, actually were, my body is the temple, your body is the temple. And it evolved from there into what you're about to hear. It's quite clear for me. It's really a claiming and a naming of the sanctuary, the sacred vessel for divinity and divine experience that I am and that you are, and that in coming together in awareness and awe of that with each other is in some ways the greatest prayer. And it's an invitation to let bliss be sacred and to invite the possibility that we are the greatest vessels and homes for prayer that is possible.
Great. So let's take a listen, and then we will come back, and I think you are going to offer a practice. Yeah?
Yes.
Great.
I am the temple, you are the temple.
I am the temple, you are the temple.
This is the prayer, bliss is the prayer.
This is the prayer, bliss is the prayer.
I am the temple, you are the temple.
I am the temple, you are the temple.
This is the prayer, bliss is the prayer.
This is the prayer, bliss is the prayer.
המקום של שכינה.
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 The earth is the temple, the water the temple.
The earth is the temple, the water the temple.
Fire the prayer, the air the prayer.
Fire the prayer, the air the prayer.
The earth is the temple, the water the temple.
The earth is the temple, the water.
So that was amazing to hear that. Thank you
So good.
for the gift of that. Yeah, I'd love if you would be willing to offer something to the folks who are listening, something that they can practice at home.
Yes, I'd love to. This is a practice that I work with in the morning when I wake before speaking. It's a practice that I love to do in public because no one knows that I'm doing it. It's a great one for those moments of waiting in line or being on hold and not having it be on hold at all, just diving into embodied magic. And so I invite you, Pavini, and you who are listening, to begin by attending to a place of presence in your body in this moment, bringing your awareness to a place of ease or connection inside of you. And now bringing additional particular awareness to your mouth cavity, to the inner cave of your mouth, and bringing awareness to your tongue, this immensely powerful muscle that does so much. Letting your awareness glide over your tongue, noticing the energy toward the root of your tongue and the way it extends all the way to the tip. And gently, slowly, at whatever pace is right for you, bringing the tip of your tongue into contact with the roof of your mouth, with your soft palate, and noticing that sensation of first contact here, and welcoming the dance of your tongue, letting your tongue move it rather than moving your tongue, and welcoming your tongue gliding along your soft palate, along the roof of your mouth, super softly or with more pressure if that's what feels best to you. And simply allowing this dance of tongue and soft palate, feeling the gifts or edges in this gentle caress, this intimate meeting. And if you notice that your awareness is entirely focused on that point of meeting, allow yourself to also continue to attend to the root of your tongue, where your tongue muscle begins. And you don't need to know exactly, just feel into it by intending to do so. And yet keeping that contact on the roof of your mouth and your soft palate, and allowing your tongue to glide. And feeling the sensations. Seeing if pleasure is available to you here, inside of your mouth, in this place where your tongue and your soft palate meet. And extending your tongue beyond your soft palate now into the interior walls of the inside of your cheeks, or perhaps the inside of your teeth or the bottom of your mouth, letting your tongue continue to explore. So many millions of years of evolutionary history in these cells and in this muscle of your tongue. Noticing the places of contact that feel good, the ones that might feel edgy or uncomfortable. Noticing if there are any ways that this contact brings you more home into your body or invites more breath in. And when you're ready, returning your tongue again to the home zone at the center of the roof of your mouth, gently exploring there, finding pace and pressure that are most inviting of pleasure for you. And gently, in right time, dropping your tongue, noticing what that slipping away of contact, of visceral contact feels like, and settling back into your tongue, laying low, and at whatever pace is right for you, gently shifting your awareness to be additionally external, again, anew. That might mean if your eyes were closed, letting light drop into them, bringing your gaze softly into the space where you are. Just noting how your body feels now from this dance of tongue and soft palate, letting whatever you received be just right. And if you found that you experienced greater presence or greater pleasure than you had been before, appreciating that and knowing that there are so many portals for presence and pleasure right here, right now, inside of our own beings. All it takes is turning our attention toward what we desire to cultivate in these realms of presence. And I so invite and welcome you into continued tongue exploration. Those of you who take it on, I so welcome hearing what you experience. This is one of my favorite ways to embodied simply pray with myself before guiding prayer experiences or song. It's a way that I learned beginnings of from my teacher of continuum movement, Emily Conrad, who had an immense love affair with the tongue and with undulation. And for me, the tongue is really an externalization of the undulation of our spine, of the continual wave motion that is in our being, the ways that we are resonant with the wave of the tides and of the tides of the cosmic sea, of the biocosmic waters, as well as the waters within us. And this tongue practice is one way to drop into that. I'm grateful to dance with you in it right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Taya. Reminds me of eating caramel.
Yes.
And savoring. And it's so, it's like we think about the things that happen, trauma, capital T, and the things that fix them, the things that help us get free are so simple, right? It's just mindful practice, repetitive mindful practice, and it's so simple and easy and free and available. And thank you for this practice. It's been such an honor to have you here on Bespoken Bones. I love all the things that you have to say, and the way that you say them is so poetic and inspirational. It's really moving. Thank you. I want to let folks know about things that you have coming up, because Taya is a local personage in the Bay Area, and she will be offering the High Holidays on September 21st and 30th. And she's also offering an Embodying Ancestral Wisdom workshop on September 10th. And she has some ancestral or virtual courses in Jewish ancestral healing and embodied presence this fall, as well as you can have individual sessions with Taya in ancestral lineage healing or in embodied vocalization ongoing. So definitely check those things out on her website, www.holytaya.com. That's HOLYTAYA.com. Thank you, Taya, for being here and for sharing with us. I am delighted to have this opportunity, and I just really hope that listening to this is a blessing on all of our ancestors, that it offers them joy and pleasure and freedom as they listen to this. And I am Pavini Moray, and we'll be back every new and full moon with more embodied goodness and ancestral wisdom.
Amen. It's such a great pleasure to be here with you, Pavini, and all who are listening to Bespoken Bones, and echoing these blessings that the ancestors and the future ones and all the now ones receive immense blessing from our conversation, from our embodied presence and our discovery, and yesing all of the pleasure that is and wants to be. Thank you, Pavini.
Thank you, Taya.